Hi, Acadiana. I'm meteorologist Dave Baker. Welcome to your Friday. And yes, we are still talking about Tropical Storm Sara. Sara dumping some historic rain over parts of Central America. And unfortunately, it looks like this is going to be the type of flood event that they saw a little over 26 years ago, back in 1998, when Hurricane Mitch came in. And unfortunately, when Hurricane Mitch rolled in with all of the flooding and the mudslides and everything that happened over Honduras and Guatemala and parts of Nicaragua and Belize, we were looking at well over 11,000 people that ended up losing their lives. And unfortunately, we're seeing this kind of starting up once again as Tropical Storm Sara. Even though it's not a very strong storm, it is pulling just tremendous amounts of rain over that far western part of the Caribbean Sea known as the Gulf of Honduras, and it's just throwing that moisture from sea level right into mountainous terrain. So as that air lifts, it dumps all that rain, and unfortunately, when you got terrain like that, you just can't handle rainfall that's in excess of 30 inches, and that's some of the forecasts that we're seeing. As far as our current temperatures, it still is a really pretty day here in Acadiana. A lot of sunshine right now, 71, dew point at 48, humidity at 44%, with a light breeze out of the north at 9. And there's a quick look at the traffic cams here this morning. Blue skies just about everywhere you go. Again, a really pretty November day, and we've got some cooler weather that's going to be coming up next week, but still kind of wondering what's going to happen with Sara's moisture ahead of the front as it starts to move in. Many of you remember on earlier this week, I believe it was Tuesday, when we had all that heavy rain, and that was a front that came in and it tapped into some of that leftover moisture that was from Rafael that was kind of swirling around in the middle part of the Gulf of Mexico. And I've got a few models that are throwing some really heavy rains, not just here in Louisiana, but all along the Gulf Coast. So that's something we're going to be watching out for as we head into the early part of next week. But the pieces of the puzzle are out there. We've got a big ridge of high pressure that's over us and also over the southern part of the Gulf Coast there. We've got a trough that's beginning to build over the far western sections, and that's what's going to spin that front in our direction toward, let's say, about Tuesday going into the early part of Wednesday. The ridge of high pressure that's currently over the southeastern part of the United States right in here is really just kind of flattening out, and it's blocking anything from coming in, or it's really blocking Tropical Storm Sara from being able to move. So the steering currents are not there anymore, and that's why we're seeing those tremendous amounts of rain. And of course, the wave height and direction today a little better than it's been for the past couple of days over the Gulf of Mexico, but we are looking at 2 to 3 foot seas and winds out of the northeast at about 15 to 20 knots this time around. A lot of clear skies here on land and a little bit of stratocumulus clouds that are going on there over the central part of the Gulf of Mexico. Some cold weather fair clouds. And then of course you can see where we've got Tropical Storm Sara there over the far western part of the Caribbean. Got a frontal boundary that's kind of draped across the middle part of the Atlantic Ocean, and another front that's going to be sliding across our area. We'll have to watch for the next couple of weeks. Some models are maybe kind of pinpointing something else wanting to develop on the tail end of the front as we go into the middle part of next week. There's a look at the Caribbean. The islands are looking fine. Got some rains over Puerto Rico, maybe some pop-up showers over Haiti and the Dominican Republic. But really the big story is going to be Tropical Storm Sara. Now, even though the winds are at 50 miles per hour, it really has not moved hardly at all. It was at 16.1 north and 86.1 west as of the last advisory that came down at noon. And the 9 o'clock advisory was at 16.1 north and 86.0 west. So you can see it has barely moved here in the last 3 hours. So there's a Central American satellite. And you can really start to see that circulation. It's right there on the coast, but a lot of the circulation is still over water. So it's still able to generate some strength by getting that fuel of that warm water and that high ocean heat content that's there. But then you got that counterclockwise rotation. So it's pulling that moisture out of the Caribbean and throwing it there on the Yucatan, Belize, and then really starting to come in here over parts of northern Honduras. And that northwestern portion of Honduras is quite mountainous right as you get away from the coast. So when you've got that quick lifting air that's dumping all of that water, it produces just an unbelievable amount of rain. And there's the floater satellite. And again, if you look really closely, you can kind of see where that center of circulation is, and it's just offshore. I'll kind of get that right about in there where you can see that little bit of a spin. And again, it's not moving a whole lot, but it looks like the majority of the center is continuing to stay offshore. Now, it is forecast to just kind of hug the coast of Honduras and then perhaps could make a landfall there on the Guatemalan and the Belize coast there coming up here toward the latter part of the weekend. But it's going to take a couple of days to make its way off toward the west. So there's the current position in the forecast track. And the National Hurricane Center really only saying that this is going to be a tropical system through the end of the weekend, and if a low pressure area is going to emerge over the waters of the Bay of Campeche, by that point in time it would be a non-tropical low. Most of the global models are agreeing with this, but some of the newer hurricane models that are coming out kind of have this maybe surviving a little bit more as it moves back out into the Bay of Campeche. And talking about some of that rain, they've already had 15 to 20 inches of rain there along the coast of Honduras, and they're expecting perhaps an additional 30 inches before this is all said and done. So again, this is a catastrophic flood event that's now happening in Central America, and this is going to be dominating your world news feeds here coming up over the next couple of days. Water temperatures again in the Gulf of Honduras are very, very warm. They're at 86, maybe 87 degrees Fahrenheit, so that's about 25 to 26 degrees or rather 29 to 30 degrees on the Celsius scale. You can see the Bay of Campeche also has some quite warm water, and that heat potential is also pretty high, not just there in the Gulf of Honduras, but also you've got some moderate heat potential there over parts of the Bay of Campeche. So if this is to work its way across and kind of get in here, as much as I think that this is probably going to be a non-tropical low, it might have a little bit of a chance to grab some energy there as it moves over the Bay of Campeche. So that is something we'll be looking at as we get into the early part of next week. Now, shear is in its favor right now, and that's why there's some forecasts from the National Hurricane Center to do some strengthening. So if it stays over water, at least if most of the center stays over water, and you continue to see that lower end wind shear, and with a high tropical cyclone heat content that's in that area, we could see some strengthening, and the official forecast brings it up to 60 miles per hour. So that's about the max that we're looking at this point. But if it gets over just that right little bit of water and that shear kind of drops off a bit, you might see something even stronger. Right now, it is not forecast to be a hurricane, but I wanted to show you the shear early next week, and this is just according to the GFS model. And you can see that the shear really drops off there from the Bay of Campeche going up to the northern Gulf Coast. And that little area that's right there near the northern Gulf Coast, this right here would be that area of low pressure. Actually, if you make it a little bit smaller, that would be that area of low pressure that would be associated with Sara going into Tuesday. So at this point, it doesn't look like there would be any strengthening. In fact, it might kind of work itself into a stronger low pressure area as it works with the front, kind of like what a nor'easter does off the eastern coast. You get a front that comes in and you get a low pressure area that's off the coast, and the two of them combine and it kind of strengthens a little bit more. So when we get into these winter, that was something that Hurricane Milton kind of did as it was making landfall over Florida, because we had that massive front that was coming in from the west. So that is one of the scenarios that we could be looking at too there, just right off the Louisiana Gulf Coast if this verifies later on next week. Now, I showed you how the National Hurricane Center's official forecast, I'll look at it here real quick and show you how we're just seeing the end of their forecast only goes out to Monday morning as a non-tropical system. But you notice when you look at the hurricane models, they do continue to wrap the low pressure area northward and then gradually eastward over toward Florida. And that's why I wanted to talk a little bit more about some of these hurricane models. We can't exactly write off Sara just yet. Now, do I think that this is going to be a tropical storm coming toward the northern Gulf Coast? Right now, that doesn't seem to be the issue. What I'm more concerned with is the amount of moisture that could come northward and work with the front, and you could possibly get another flood event either in Louisiana or perhaps eastward over toward Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, and Georgia. You remember earlier this week when we had the front coming in, that moisture that was left over from Rafael got pulled in and it dumped a lot of rain right over the central part of Acadiana and southeastern parts of Louisiana. So that's kind of what we're looking at least what I'm looking at here, as one of the possibilities going into the early part of next week. The other thing I wanted to show you was we're talking about that maybe the center of circulation would stay just off the Honduran coast. And if it sits out there long enough, it might have a chance for a little bit of strengthening. But you can see the wind speed in knots. For the most part, our models are keeping it somewhere in that 45 knot range, which is 50 miles per hour, which is basically right where it is right now. And that takes it through 48 hours. And then remember, it's scheduled to move over land. So you are seeing some weakening here going into days 3, days 4. But then by day 5, which would be the early part of next week, you see some of these computer models going back up on the intensity. Could that possibly be the circulation surviving the Yucatan Peninsula and moving into the Bay of Campeche and having another shot at perhaps getting a little bit stronger? Would it actually be a tropical system, or could we be talking about that nor'easter type of situation? But there's at least one model that goes Cat 2 and one model that goes Cat 1, while the remainder of them keep them as a moderate tropical storm with winds at 50 or 60 miles per hour. So relax this weekend, but just keep in mind we could have a rain event coming up for the early part of next week. So I'm going to show you the hurricane models, and what I'm going to do, this is basically the total accumulated precipitation. So you can see over Central America, there's a ton of it. But watch what happens when the remnant moisture, or maybe even a remnant low, kind of works its way westward and then over the Bay of Campeche. You can see that's kind of washing out here, but then you see a little bit of a low again, and on and off you'll see that low kind of drifting over the Gulf and then getting caught up by that trough and pushing off toward the northeast. Look at the amounts of rain that are forecast through Wednesday for parts of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and the coast of Florida. Anywhere between 2 and 4 inches of rain on top of what we've already had, not just here in Lafayette and the surrounding areas on Tuesday, but the very heavy rains we saw over the weekend over the western parts of Louisiana. So that could be a problem because the grounds are very saturated right now. Our rivers and bayous are quite high, so it isn't going to take a whole lot of rain to get some flooding going once again. Will it be flash flooding like what we saw on Tuesday? Not so sure about that, but when you have this amount of moisture that's in the atmosphere, that possibility is definitely there. The HAFS model, again, I'm going to use a total accumulated precipitation, and notice you get a little bit of a low, although on the HAFS model it passes a little bit farther to the east and keeps a lot of that heavy rain more in the offshore waters. But working with that trough, you can still see there are some areas over southeastern Louisiana and right off the coast of Acadiana here that could pick up somewhere in that 2, maybe up to 5-inch rainfall. But the heaviest amounts, because of the track kind of turning more like that, keeps a lot of the heavy rain more in the offshore waters. So the GFS, again, has the low pretty much just completely falling apart, but you see that moisture coming in, and then it kind of rotates off toward Florida. But that frontal boundary that continues to move out into the Atlantic Ocean does tend to sag a little bit farther down into the Caribbean Sea. And I'll tell you, the earlier GFS model developed another low on the tail end of that front about maybe 10 days from now over the southern part of the Caribbean Sea. So at this point, I can't exactly say that Sara is going to be the last named storm. Could we have a Tony? There's a possibility there. Euro model also has a festering low pressure area there over the Central American continent, and then you notice that moisture starts to get pulled up to the north, but most of the moisture on the Euro kind of pushes it off toward Florida and not really bother us a whole lot. Canadian model, pretty similar, although sometimes you get a little bit of a low kind of redeveloping, but again, that front absorbs it and pushes it off toward the east pretty quick. And the same thing with the Icon model. It festers there near Honduras and Belize for several days. And then as the front starts to push, notice how it draws in some of that moisture moving along the northern Gulf Coast. So based on the global models, the GFS keeps the rain fairly light here in Louisiana, probably less than an inch. associated with the front, but you can see there's that heavy swath of rain that's pretty close to the coast. And, over the next couple of days, these models are going to wiggle back and forth. So right now, everything looks pretty good. But if you just move that line up northward, maybe 30 to 60 miles or so, you're going to be on land and you're going to have a flood event. Euro model has just a little bit more of a 2-inch rainfall over the Acadiana area for the early part of next week. And by the way, these are the rainfall totals for the next week. So we're not going to have any today, tomorrow, Sunday. And if we're going to get any rain, it's probably not going to start until Monday afternoon or Monday evening. But so this would be through about Wednesday. Canadian model keeps the heavier rains on the coast from southeastern Louisiana to the Alabama and Florida beaches. And the Icon model has a little bit heavier rain in the offshore waters, maybe a little bit over the basin, but it seems to be pulling a little bit farther inland over parts of Mississippi and Alabama. So there are hints anywhere from Acadiana eastward over toward the Florida Peninsula. There could be some heavier than normal rains associated with Sara coming in ahead of a front for the early part of next week. And again, this is the time of the year that we usually start to see the last of the tropical systems. Even though the global tropics hazard outlook for the next 2 weeks really doesn't show a whole lot, a couple of models, the extended models going out with the GFS, as the front that's expected to come through on Tuesday going into Wednesday, as it continues to progress southeastward into the Caribbean, couple of models are kind of hinting at low pressure trying to develop again over the western part of the Caribbean Sea. So will we have another one? At this point, it doesn't look like that, but we still can't say that Sara is going to be the last named system of hurricane season. And we just got 15 more days to go before the season ends at the end of this month. Well, I hope you enjoy Let's Talk Tropics. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on those notifications. And don't forget, you can hear me, my forecasts on Big 102.1, Planet Radio 106.7, and Freedom 95.1. And over the course of the weekend, at this point, I'm not anticipating doing any extra Let's Talk Tropics on Saturday or Sunday. But if you follow my social media pages, if I start to see this heavy rain event kind of materializing, and if it's going to be affecting us, I will give you the updates both on Facebook and X. So please follow both of those pages. I'm meteorologist Dave Baker. I'm excited that it's the weekend and it's going to be gorgeous out there. So enjoy yourself, and I will talk to you on Monday. Have a great weekend.